not want people touching this? Good afternoon. Hello. Look at this crowd. This is wonderful. Thank you all for being here. My name is Damon Seils. I'm the mayor of Carrboro, and thank you. I'm joined here today with some of my colleagues on the town council who I'd like to quickly recognize. They are council members Randy Haven O'Donnell. Where are you, Randy? Barbara Fouché. Susan Romaine. And Eleazar Posada. I have the privilege of welcoming you all here today to share in what has become a Carrboro tradition, a community reading of Frederick Douglass's iconic speech, The Meaning of the 4th of July for the Negro. Douglass delivered this speech almost exactly 170 years ago on July 5th, 1852, and Carrboro's community reading of the speech is now in its 9th year. It was an idea brought forward by Carrboro resident and former public defender James Williams, who is here today with us. And it was carried through in its first 8 years by my predecessor, Mayor Lydia Lavelle. But we take this occasion to hear Douglass's words as a reflection on our past. But of course, each year we learn again that his words are also a window on our present and a moral guidepost for our future. That's particularly true in difficult years like this one, when we are reminded that the rights and liberties promised in this country's founding documents have never been enjoyed fully or equally by everyone. They're here one day and gone the next. Their defense requires the vigilance of collective social movements, inspiring visionaries and artists, and progressive lawmakers and judges. And for that reminder, today we continue this valuable Carrboro 4th of July tradition. But before we get to it, I'm going to offer a couple of housekeeping notes. First, if you want to follow along during the reading, there were some copies, printed copies of the speech out at the entry in the lobby, so hopefully you picked one of those up or share with your neighbor if you can. You can also find the text of the speech on the Carrboro website at carrboro.nc.gov. Just type Frederick Douglass into the search field and it'll come right up. Restrooms. There are restrooms through the door behind me to my left. There are also restrooms downstairs off the main lobby. I want to thank Town of Carrboro employees who made today's event possible by doing the planning and the promotion and the setup. They include especially Charles Harrington, Anita Jones-McNair, and Catherine Osorto. And I also want to acknowledge the volunteers and staff from the IFC who have a table right over here today. They are sharing some information about IFC services in the community and also about the 2022 Freedom Summer Series. So please stop by and learn more about that. And vitally important, I believe I saw some voter registration forms over there. So if you are not registered to vote or if you have not updated your voting address, please do that as soon as possible. This year is very important. Okay, the fun part now for me is that I get to introduce our readers. They are 34 members of the community. I think this is our biggest list yet. Some of them have read with us before. Many of them are first-timers. Readers, I appreciate your willingness to share a part of your Independence Day with us, but especially to share a part of yourself with us. I know how difficult it can be to stand up in front of a group of people and speak. Welcome to Carrboro, welcome to home. This is your welcome here as a speaker and a reader today, and really the centerpiece of this event for us today. So thank you for being a part of it. I want to be sure that we get a chance to recognize all of you so that we know who's going to be speaking today. So I'm going to call your name, and if you'll please stand up, I'll go through the list pretty quickly. So stand up if you can when I call your name, so we'll all see who you are. And I'll be calling your name in the same order that we'll be reading the speech today. And that starts with, of course, Senator Valerie Fouché. of course, privileged to Senator Foushee, but I am going to read the rest of the list very quickly. So, Quentin Harper, Aaron Peck, Diana Ramirez, Mauricio Solano, Mandy Carter, I know Mandy is here, Tiffany Palmer Lytle, Kendall Lytle, Gianna Caldwell. Is Gianna here? Actually, I think Gianna is one of the people who ended up not being able to make it. I do have, though, Minister Robert Campbell with us. Miss Betty Curry. Is Michelle Laws, Dr. Laws, are you here today? In that case, I'm going to introduce to everyone someone you know very well, Judge Hathaway Pendergrass. Sophie Superman. Soteria Shepperson. Jonathan Brown. And Rachel Brown. Dolores Bailey. James Williams, who I mentioned earlier. Wamik Chowdhury. Theodore Nollert. Reverend Michael Cousin. Chris Atack, Chief Atack. Namdi Brandon. Herman Foushee. Bishop Victor Glover. Rebecca Cerise. Dr. Debbie Stroman. Deanna Thornville. Simon Palmore. Donna Jones. Catherine Frey. Barbara Jessie Black. And, of course, Professor Ted Shaw. Right, thank you all for that. So readers, the list I just read with the numbers of your assigned passages is up here on the podium in case you've forgotten where you are. There's also a printed copy of the speech up here in case you don't have one with you. And we'll be following the order that I just read your names in. So when the reader or two before you is speaking, it might be a good idea for you to make your way kind of over to my left here, just so we can keep things moving. Audience members, please hold your applause until the end of the speech. I think you'll find, many of you have been here before, but I think those of you who are newcomers will find that it moves more smoothly and also has greater impact when you hear the speech uninterrupted. But we'll make lots of noise at the end, and then we'll hear from James Williams, who I recognized earlier, for a few closing remarks. But first, every year we begin this event with comments from a special guest. And that person always shares reflections on Douglas's speech, on Douglas the man, on his time. Some previous speakers have been historians who helped us consider Douglas's historical context. Other speakers were legal scholars and judges who spoke about the broader struggle for freedom since Douglas's time, including our ongoing struggles here in North Carolina for voting rights and fair elections. Today's speaker, I'm very happy to say, is Professor Irving Joyner. Now, many of you know Professor Joyner from his decades of political activism here in North Carolina. Irv Joyner has been a professor at law at the North Carolina Central University School of Law since 1982. He teaches courses in criminal law and criminal procedure, civil rights, and race and the law. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Professor Joyner wrote the book on criminal procedure in North Carolina. He provides legal counsel to political, religious, and community organizations and to individuals in civil rights and criminal appeals cases. He's been named Lawyer of the Year by the George H. White Bar Association and the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers, among many other honors and awards for his work as a professor, civil rights and criminal law litigator, and a political activist. The first time I met Professor Joyner, which he has no reason to remember, maybe he does, we'll find out, was the afternoon of June 3rd, 2013. That was just before that day's so-called mega Moral Monday demonstration at the General Assembly in Raleigh. It was a rally in support of a new progressive fusion politics in North Carolina. Many, many people from all over the state were there that day in the Martin Street Baptist Church, where Professor Joyner shared some wise words with us about what it meant for us to be present in that moment. Knowing he knew very well that many of us would be later at risk of arrest that day, including, it turns out, several members of the Carrboro Board of Aldermen. So I am personally grateful to Professor Joyner and his team for getting most of us out of the Wake County Jail that night, and especially grateful for the opportunity here today to welcome Professor Joyner a decade later, almost, back to Carrboro. So let's give Professor Joyner a warm Carrboro welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I'm really honored and pleased to be here on this this day. I just want to mention that in my lifetime, I've never been in a position that we are on the brink of the continuing existence of our democracy, and whether it is going to be here in the manner that we have come to think of it. And so I appreciate this. Older than some, younger than others that's here, and if you've had a more fearful experience than this, then please let me know at the end of this event. But it's always good to be here, and I hope that you are motivated by this to be active in dealing with the issues that confront us here. I want to thank Mayor LaVelle for starting this event, this tradition, which is now spread all over the country. A lot of people are now emulating what you are doing here, what you started here in Carrboro. Attorney James Williams was the brain behind this gathering. He's typically the brain behind a lot of gatherings, as you may know. And I certainly want to thank Mayor Seils for inviting me to be the speaker. Were I not a speaker, I would have been a reader, because I'm happy to say that I have been a reader in the past 9 readings here. Frederick Douglass is a special hero of mine, and it certainly is an honor that once again that our readers are led by Senator. I'm from the Baptist Church, and we're in a name it and claim it mode. And so if you speak it into existence, then it shall be. But this is not supposed to be political. And I'm not going to make it political, but you have your day where you will make these decisions. I also want to thank this audience for being here, and all of the past readers that I've been able to join with, and then the new readers who are here, and hoping that you will continue to be a reader in the future. And you have now joined our ranks, and you are now promptly pictured on the FBI Most Wanted list. For a theme, I would like for you to just think with me for a minute about this great song, which was written by Billy Taylor in 1962 and recorded by Nina Simone in 1967. And the words of the first stanza of that song is, "I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear." The other verses to that song, but the notion that's announced here is one that is present with African Americans, people of color, people who are in the downtrodden list all the time. I've always wished I knew how it feels to be free. And I wish I knew how it feels to have true equality in this land. And I think that kind of sums up Frederick Douglass. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born in February 14 of 1818. He took the date because he didn't know when he was born. And because his mother always talked to him about love, which equated with Valentine's Day, he then chose that as his announced birthday. Many of us don't know when we were born. Some are still trying to figure out if they were born. But he took it as his own. So his birth began, for our purposes, on that day. The life of Frederick Douglass began on February 14, 1841, 23 years after the birth of Frederick Bailey. Frederick Bailey was born on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay in Talbot County, Maryland. That's, as they say in the country, near about Baltimore. He did not know his age because as an enslaved person, that wasn't an important event nor important information for him. And it was some 17, 18 years later that he was able to put together the numbers behind his birth. His mother was Harriet Bailey, who was an enslaved African who engaged in or was coerced into sexual intercourse with the master of the plantation on which she was owned at the time. And he was the father of Frederick Bailey. Frederick Bailey was raised by his grandmother because it was the tradition at that time that the mother and child would be separated soon after birth so as not to form an attachment between them, such that it was easier to sail and transfer ownership of those individuals. His mother was sent to a plantation about 15 miles away and occasionally came to visit Frederick, who was being raised by the grandmother. And I want to kind of talk about that beginning to help us to understand the passion and the motivation of Frederick during those times. And why is it that he was as adamant about abolition as he was and made that his defining task and goal in life? He grew up enslaved, and as a young boy had seared in his memories the beating by the slave overseer of people who were in the community in which he was raised. And he vividly remembered the impact of the cowskin whip and the baton used by the overseers to keep the enslaved people in line. And he talked about the viciousness of what he was able to observe and remember at 5, 6, and 7 years old, and how it impacted him. He grew up in Baltimore because his master at the time was able to rent out, kind of like Hertz and Budget and Rent-A-Car, rent them out for profit because they were chattel, they were possessions, they were property as a matter of law, and they had that ability. And so at 7 years old, he was rented out to the Auld family in Baltimore, where he went to live with them until such time as they deemed that it was no longer necessary for them to have him there. The wife, Sarah, was new to the enslavement process and made the early mistake of teaching Frederick to read, and engaged in an ongoing effort to help him to learn to read. And that process was one that was engaged in defiance of her husband, who followed the old tradition that if you were enslaved, that it was improper to educate or help that individual to learn to read. And that she was not only violating the social conviction at that time, but also violating the law. But she persisted, and he became an eager learner because he was picking up the ability to discern what was going on around him. And once that engine began, it did not stop. It continued, and he became a prolific reader and writer or student, being self-taught in the community in which he was, that he lived. Baltimore, as an enslaved person, was significantly different than enslavement in Talbot County. It's kind of like the difference between the city and the country. Y'all know about that. Say amen. And the country, they treat you like you're in the country. In the city, there's a little gentility that's there. And in Baltimore, you had a kind of mixed economy. You had those Africans there who were enslaved, but you also had a whole bunch of Africans who were free. And in fact, in those days in Maryland, there was the largest population of free Africans that existed in this country. There weren't a whole lot of Africans in New York and Connecticut, New Jersey, and those free states. Most Africans at that time were living in the South. Ironically, the second largest population of free Africans was here in North Carolina. But Maryland was the largest population of free Africans during that time, which meant that there was a lot of interaction and connection between those free Africans and those who were enslaved. And in many instances, you couldn't tell the difference between them because they didn't wear signs that said, "I'm free." And the interactions were such that it helped to show to those who were enslaved that there was a different way of life that they could enjoy and different privileges that attached to that designation. In the country, it was brutal, traumatic, where individuals who were enslaved were brutally treated. It was a occupational hazard in the country that every day, or at least every week, you would be whipped. And I don't mean, like some of you may remember being whipped back in the day by mama and papa, when they told you to go out and get a switch and bring it in and then shine it up just before you got spanking. The whipping of the slaves typically was with cow skin, cowhide, that basically ripped the skin off your body and left behind a signature that you had been whipped. And even where there was even though there was not disobedience or any infractions committed by the enslaved person, as a sign of you better not do this, you were whipped. And every time you were whipped, wherever the whip landed, it left a gash. And it took time. And it was a regular occurrence because it instilled fear within those persons, one who were being whipped, and those individuals who were witnessing. I mean, I'm familiar with that with my grandmother because she would let you know that she was in charge. But that was love, and this was brutality. This was brutality, cash cold brutality. So Frederick Bailey was blessed to be in Baltimore, even as an enslaved person, because life was much easier there than it would have been for him in Talbot County. And as he grew up in the Alls house in Baltimore, he was then given more and more freedoms. And he took it upon himself to work wherever he could, because being able to work put him in situations where he had to learn to read different things. So it was a method of, one, staying busy, two, picking up skills, and three, perfecting his ability to read and understand. And as he reached into the age of 10 and 11, he came in contact with a publication, the Columbia Orator, which was a collection of writing which dealt with the conflict between slaves and non-slaves and whether slavery was appropriate or not. And he began to read this at 10 and 11 years old. And he was intrigued by a specific article in the book where there was a debate between an enslaved person and a slave master as they discussed the rationale behind slavery. And at the end of this long dialogue between the two, the slave master then emancipated the enslaved person because of this persuasiveness of the argument. And that triggered in Frederick Bailey's mind that I can be that person. There is something better than this. And I need to prepare myself for the better. And a part of the better is me getting out of here. So I don't know where I'm going, but anywhere is better than this. And then his motivation from that point forward at 12 and 13 years old was to be free, And everything that he did was geared toward being free and gaining freedom for himself and helping others to understand the importance of being free. And there he became an ardent abolitionist in mind, not in fact, at that point. He also built up friendships around in that community where he talked with other young people about the perils of slavery and that there was hope. And then he talked with those young people who were a part of the free African community. And it continued to give him hope and that he could also join in that service. But he knew also of the perils of attempting to escape, because if he was unsuccessful in that effort, then all hell would break loose for him. It could mean his very life and existence. So he planned, and he thought about it and worked it through. And as he was working it through, his master died. Jumped up and just dropped, died. And you know, when you die, your property is divided up between your heirs. And he was caught in the distribution of the assets of the estate, and then had to leave Baltimore and return to Talbot County. And when he returned to Talbot County, life turned for him, because he then was eventually placed on one of those plantations where the trauma that he was seeking to avoid became a reality in his life. And he then encountered at 16 years of age, 15 years of age, the brutality of the whip. The brutality of the whip that then focused on him. And now he is feeling the sting. He is feeling the pain. He is experiencing the trauma that other enslaved people felt in that community. He was then placed on the Covey plantation. And he was placed there because, based on his life in Baltimore, he was a little uppity. Wasn't like the rest of the enslaved people because his experience was different. He tried to fit in, but it just kept coming out of him. He was tall for his age. light complexion, they called him yellow. Some of you may have heard of that in the past. And everyone knew that he was a mulatto and that he was supposed to get preferential treatment as an enslaved person. But the Covey plantation was one in which he was assigned. And the master on the Covey plantation was known as a slave breaker, that he was to bring those slaves who were uppity down to the level that they were supposed to be on. And he was contracted to be on the Covey plantation for a year. And he described the first 6 months there as being the worst thing that could ever happen to him in his life. That every week he suffered a vicious beating that left him weakened, destroyed his spirit, and wiped out his motivation. But about 6 months into this struggle, he then one day decided that I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to fight back. And that decision was made when Covey attempted to attack him, and he fought back. And they had a 2-hour battle in which Fredrick got the best of Covey. And for the next 6 months, Covey never touched him again. And then he was able to return to the plantation and ultimately to the Baltimore with the All family. But he learned a lot. This is a couple of minutes before critical race theory was developed. This was critical race history, and he was the history maker. And when he went back to Baltimore, his mind was set on freedom. Any way possible, because he remembered. Not so much that he remembered, but his brain remembered, and his back remembered, and his thighs remembered. Because every time he looked, he could see a visible manifestation of the trauma that he faced growing up. So when we look at the passion, that he exhibits in the reading here today and in other speeches that he gave, you will see just that. And I want to just share one in particular with you. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one. And it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. In the light of these ideas, Negroes will be hunted in the North and held and flogged in the South. Passion, words that should guide us as we think about the situations in which we find ourselves today. It may be a moral one, it may be a physical one, but there must be a struggle. Now, Douglass went on to leave Baltimore, disguised as a sailor, to jump on a train and ride out of Baltimore, and ended up in New York. Prior to leaving, he had entered a romantic relationship with Anna Murphy, who was 5 years older than him, and who was a strong supporter of his effort to be free. She was, at the time, a free African. And once he landed in New York, he then sent for her back in Baltimore, and she joined him, and they married. And they ended up in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where they lived. And when she came, and they went to New Bedford where they married, they then took on the name of Douglass. They became Frederick and Anna Douglass at that point. A new beginning, a new life, a resurrection of the person. Or as some of the folks used to say in the church, born again under a new administration. And as a new administrator under the name of Frederick Douglass, he became then the champion of the abolitionist movement, but not only for African Americans, but also for women. He fought as hard for women as he did for African Americans. And given the activities of the past few weeks, women certainly need some champions today. Because if they can take away the right of freedom of choice, then they can take away the right of anything that we have. And with that, please enjoy the reading.
Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, not with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your mind back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government. England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper. But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of their government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need to say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned, they remonstrated, they did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn, yet they persevered.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we at this distance of time regarded. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it. On the 2nd of July, 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshipers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all the allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeed, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history. The very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Ciudadanos, vuestros padres cumplieron esa resolución, tuvieron éxito, y hoy tú cosechas los frutos de su éxito. La libertad ganada es tuya. Por lo tanto, puedes celebrar apropiadamente este aniversario. El 4 de julio es el primer gran hecho en la historia de tu nación, el verdadero eslabón en la cadena de tu destino aún no desarrollado.
Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So, indeed, are regarded. The principles containing that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles, be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost.
El orgullo y el patriotismo, no menos que la gratitud, os impulsan a celebrarlo y a tenerlo en perpetuo recuerdo. He dicho que la Declaración de Independencia es el eslabón de la cadena del destino de tu nación. Así, de hecho, lo considero. Los principios contenidos en este instrumento son principios salvadores. Defiende esos principios. Sé fiel a ellos en todas las ocasiones, en todos los lugares y contra todos los enemigos y a cualquier costo.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you and honor their memory. They loved their country better than their own private interest, and will concede that this is a rare virtue that ought to commend respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their more likely to cede. Oops. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression.
You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Mark them, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you.
Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of your joyous enthusiasm. The causes which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown have never lacked for a tongue. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and are as familiar to you as household word. They form the staples of your national poetry and eloquence. I leave, therefore, the great deeds of your fathers to others. My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his causes is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die and must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principle of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devoted gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sake and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful, but such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pales of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated Temple of Liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today?
Fellow citizens, above your national turbulence joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today. Rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular thing would be a treason, most scandalous and shocking, and would make me reproach before God and the world.
So my subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with the American bondman making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on the 4th of July. Whether return to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly blinds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not in heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, "It is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists failed to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there's nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it in the way they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral and intellectual and responsible being?"
Southern statute books are covered with enactments. forbidding under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man. Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, coffee shop owners, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hill, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that a human is entitled to liberty, that she is the rightful owner of her own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? It is settled by the rules of logic and argumentation. As a master beast with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principles of justice, hard to understand, how should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There's blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhumane cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such an argument is past. At a time like this, retching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, that I had the ability and that I could reach the nation's ear, I would today put out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For this is not a time of light that is needed, but fire. It is not a gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of a nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? Answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty and unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all of your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States. At this very hour, go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse. And when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now, as the price of men was never higher, and which is carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this confederacy. This trade is one of the peculiarities of American institutions. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated.
The foreign slave trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and man. It is, however, a notable fact, while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable. Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man-drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There see the old man, with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother, whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13 weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she's been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. That crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on.
Follow this drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever. And never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking? Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States.
I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible reality. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them chained to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number have been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they're usually driven in the darkness of night. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I have been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps and the piteous cries of the chain gangs that passed our door.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in the boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust race on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken, too gratefully the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight.
But a still more inhumane, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented. By an act of this American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has not been nationalized in the most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state of institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and the American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is a hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have within the past 2 years been hunted down and without a moment's warning hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included. For Black men, there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient under this coal-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary Black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witness for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers. In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of free millions of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crown-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad,
honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever seen the character of a nation, a system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty.
You shed tears over fallen Hungary, and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regard to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence, and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but are as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America. You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world and are understood by the world to declare that you hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country. Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It snaps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth.
It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it, and yet you cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Be warned. A horrible reptile is curled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear it away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever.
But it is answered in reply to all this that precisely what I have now denounced is, in fact, guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is a part of that Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your fathers, instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least, so I believe, and others, have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour.
Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture that I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope, while drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions. My spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not stand now in the same relations with each other as they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference. The time was when such could be done, but a change has come now over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its charted agents. Oceans no longer divide but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it, all God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come, all fiends to end, and change into a faithful friend, each foe.
So wow, that was beautiful. I want to thank our readers today, and I could tell from that applause that you appreciated their efforts also. I want to thank Professor Joyner for, yes. For bringing that message. I've known Professor Joyner for decades. I think it is fair to say that he is a giant for justice for civil rights, for equality, in addition to being an excellent legal scholar. So thank you so much, Professor Joyner. And Mayor Damon and the town of Carrboro, I want to thank you all for, this is the 9th year, the 9th consecutive year. So next year will be year number 10, and we got to do something special. Not to say this isn't special, but 10-year anniversary, and I'm already giving that some thought. If you don't believe me, just check with the mayor. So anyway, but also I do seriously want to thank the town, and I want to thank all of you in attendance. It is just a beautiful thing to have people come together, especially in this moment. And I think when we think about Frederick Douglass, really, that's what he was about, trying to get people together to fight for justice and equality. He would appreciate this also. I want to mention, 2018, we came together to do some programming around the bicentennial of the birth of Frederick Douglass. As Professor Joyner mentioned, he was born in 1818, but in the course of doing that, and I must say, I mean, I've done a number of programs, planning and working with groups to plan. That was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, was planning those events or helping to plan those events. And one of the things that came out of that was working with the Frederick Douglass Initiative, and they're making available to us a special bicentennial edition of Frederick Douglass's first autobiography, Narratives of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, written by himself. And I mention that because one of the things that we obtained, I can't remember how many copies of the book. And our main goal was to make sure to try to get them into the hands of young people, students. And so, after 2018, we had some left over. So what I've been trying to do is when we do these events, to get a copy of this in the hands of young readers in particular. And I'm defining young a little loosely. I'm thinking anybody under 25. So if you're here, you read, let's get you a copy of this book. I have some in here. I've got some others in my car. So I want to be able to make that available to you. The other thing that I want to mention related to that bicentennial is that I began looking at some things, and one of the things that interested me is whether or not Frederick Douglass had any sort of relationship, with Harriet Tubman. Did the two of them do any work together? And so in the course of looking at that, I came across a letter that he had written on her behalf. And I mention that because this year is the bicentennial of the birth of Harriet Tubman. And I know this is about Frederick Douglass and about issues confronting us today, but I don't think Mr. Douglass would mind my lifting up Harriet Tubman. And I'm hoping, I don't know, there may be some events planned around here related to that. If not, I hope somebody does so. If you know of any, let me know. But in 1868, Harriet Tubman got in touch with Frederick Douglass and asked if he would support or send a reference related to an biography that was being done of her. And he responded yes. And he wrote this letter that, if you don't mind, I would like to share with you. He said, "Dear Harriet, I am glad to know that the story of your eventful life has been written by a kind lady and that the same is soon to be published. You asked for what you do not need when you call upon me for a word of commendation. I need such words from you far more than you need them from me, especially where your superior labors and devotion to the cause of the lately enslaved of our land are known as I know them. The difference between us is very marked. Most that I have done and suffered in the service of our cause has been in the public, and I have received much encouragement at every step of the way. You, on the other hand, have labored in a private way. I have wrought in the day, you in the night. I have had the applause of the crowd and the satisfaction that comes of being approved by the multitude, while the most that you have done has been witnessed by a few trembling, scarred, and footsore bondmen and women whom you have led out of the house of bondage, and whose heartfelt God bless you has been your only reward. The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witnesses of your devotion to freedom and your heroism. Except John Brown of sacred memory, I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than you have. Much that you have done would seem improbable to those who do not know you as I know you. It is to me a great pleasure and a great privilege to bear testimony for your character and your works, and to say to those to whom you may come that I regard you in every way truthful and trustworthy. I don't know, I get emotional when I read that. But, it was mentioned that Frederick Douglass is so important to us today for so many reasons. I often talk about his prescience. I talk about the fact that, and it's been mentioned today, so many of the things that he talked about and that were important to him, we are still wrestling with 170 years later. It was referenced the recent Supreme Court decisions, especially the decision on abortion rights and gender issues and the right of women, and what we have to, I won't say look forward to, but what is coming around the bend. Supreme Court took up a case from North Carolina that they didn't have to take. That is causing me to lose sleep. But when as I think about those things, and I think about Frederick Douglass, Joyner mentioned that he fought for the rights of women. He did, actually, very early in his life. He was the only black man in, I think it was 1848, at the Seneca Falls Women's Conference. And so when the platform was being done and the resolutions, things were moving well until they got to the place about voting rights for women. And there was some consternation. And a number of the men, and these were, like I said, he was the only black person there, so these were like, we're saying, no, we don't think we can do that right now. Frederick Douglass stood up and said, yes, you will. And he carried the day. When that platform was finished, it supported women's right to vote. So And so, this speech was done in 1852, and I know it's almost 2 o'clock. I guarantee you I'll be done by 2, if not before. This speech was done in 1852, this speech which is generally considered his most famous speech, one of the most famous speeches ever in this country, maybe one of the most famous in the world. 1852. And, he gave thousands of speeches, and so this is one, but this is the one that people say is his most famous, maybe his best. But when he was he talked about the clouds on the horizon. It was a very depressing time. But somehow he managed to maintain hope. Well, guess what happened? 5 years later, 1857, February, you had the U.S. Supreme Court, just as it's doing today, taking away rights. They decided the Dred Scott decision. And you all know what that decision said. If there ever was a time for a person to want to give up hope and to just lay in a corner and say, I'm done with this, that may have been the moment. But that wasn't Frederick Douglass. In May of 1857, he gave a speech in response to that decision. That here again, he criticized it, he critiqued it, he talked about how horrible it was, but he finished with, we can do this, we're not going to give up. And then, as Dr. Joyner mentioned, he didn't give the date, but the speech that he gave, it was in August of 1857, just a few months after that horrible decision, that he gave the West Indian Emancipation Day speech, where he talked about power concedes nothing without a struggle. And you heard, what the other things that he said, based upon Irving Joyner's remarks. I won't repeat them. But the point is, he's still talking about struggle. He's still talking about the need to mobilize, organize, to become active, to become engaged. And I think that's the message that comes out of, that's what he was about. And if we take away anything from these readings that we do, we don't, and it's a beautiful speech. We love to engage people, but as he said, we've got to deal with what is confronting us today. And if we don't engage, if we don't mobilize, if we don't organize, we know, and I know this is not a political occasion, but my God, we got the midterms coming up, and a lot is on the table, a lot is at risk, and we need to do what Frederick would have us do. So I'm going to kind of leave it there. I do, though, want to invite Rachel Brown to come up, and we're going to close this thing out. And she is going to do this, and I am going to help. Okay. So we want to leave you with this.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains. Now let's do it again, and let's have you all say it too. Okay.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. This message was approved by Frederick Douglass. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for being here. I'd like to ask all the readers, if you're, those of you who are still here, to come up front before you go so we can take a quick photo for the event. Also, thanks again to the folks from the IFC who have also brought some treats to share, so on your way out, stop by the table there. Thanks for coming out, y'all. Happy 4th.